The slap echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. In the middle of Jefferson High's crowded quad, under the bright October sun, a senior girl named Emily Harper staggered back, her cheek already blooming red from the open-handed blow delivered by Connor Reed, the school's golden boy linebacker. The second slap came faster, from Connor's best friend Blake, catching her across the other cheek while the gathered crowd of students gasped, laughed, or froze in stunned silence. Phones rose like periscopes. Emily's books scattered across the concrete. She was alone. Small, dressed in a simple navy cardigan and jeans, her dark hair falling across a face now streaked with tears she refused to let fall. Connor leaned in close, smirking for the cameras, and sneered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Know your place, scholarship trash." No one moved to help her. Not the teachers lingering by the doors, not the freshmen who idolized Connor, not even the friends who usually sat with Emily at lunch. They melted into the crowd the moment the first slap landed. The message was clear: cross Connor Reed and you disappear. But 30 yards away, leaning against the flagpole with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched so tight it could crack marble, a quiet senior named Jacob Rourke watched everything. Jacob was 18, broad-shouldered, and kept to himself. He wore the same faded black hoodie every day, earbuds always in, grades perfect but presence invisible. Most kids assumed he was just another burnout who'd enlisted to escape this town. They were half right. Jacob had enlisted. What they didn't know, what nobody in that school knew, was that Jacob had already graduated Paris Island 2 summers earlier at 16. Lying about his age with forged papers after his mother died and his father drank himself into the ground. He'd come back senior year only because the Marine Corps let him finish high school before shipping him to his permanent duty station. He was a private first class on extended leave, a designated marksman who'd already qualified expert on every weapon system from the M4 to the Barrett 50 cal, a kid who had spent the last 24 months learning how to break men twice his size in under 3 seconds. And the girl bleeding on the concrete was the only person who'd ever been kind to him when he came home. The crowd was still buzzing, Connor basking in the attention, when Jacob pushed off the flagpole and started walking. The noise died in ripples as students noticed him cutting through the circle like a shark through minnows. Connor turned, laughing, ready with another clever line, until he saw Jacob's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a high school boy. They were flat, cold, 1,000-yard eyes that had already watched friends die in training accidents and had learned to shut emotion off like a faucet. Connor's smirk faltered. "This doesn't concern you, Rourke." Jacob didn't answer. He simply stopped 2 feet away, looked down at Emily still on her knees gathering her books with shaking hands, then looked back up at Connor and Blake. The courtyard had gone dead silent. Somewhere a phone kept recording. Emily's voice came out small but steady. "Jacob, don't. Please, they're not worth it." He crouched, gently took the books from her trembling fingers and stacked them neatly. Then he helped her to her feet, his hand under her elbow like she weighed nothing. Only when she was standing did he speak, and his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who no longer asked permission for anything. "Apologize," he said to Connor. Connor laughed again, but it cracked in the middle. "Or what, tough guy? You gonna cry to the principal?" Jacob didn't blink. "I said apologize." Blake stepped forward, chest puffed. "Make us." The slap that followed wasn't loud. It was surgical. Jacob's hand snapped out, open palm catching Blake across the ear with a precise, cupped strike that ruptured the eardrum instantly. Blake dropped like someone yanked the power cord out of his spine, screaming and clutching the side of his head as blood trickled between his fingers. The entire courtyard inhaled as one organism. Connor's eyes went wide. He swung a wild haymaker born of panic and steroid rage. Jacob slipped inside it the way he'd been taught by men who killed for a living, caught Connor's wrist, pivoted, and drove his elbow into the bigger boy's solar plexus. All 240 pounds of starting linebacker folded like cheap lawn furniture. Before Connor could gasp, Jacob had twisted the arm into a textbook standing armbar, forcing Connor to his knees in the same spot Emily had just occupied. The joint screamed. Connor screamed louder. Jacob leaned down until his mouth was an inch from Connor's ear. "You put hands on her again?" he said, calm as a winter morning, "and I will erase you from this planet so completely your own mother will forget you existed. Nod if you understand." Connor nodded frantically, tears and snot running down his face. Jacob released him. Connor collapsed, sobbing into the concrete. The crowd was frozen. 100 phones captured every angle. Jacob turned, gently placed Emily's books in her arms, and brushed a strand of hair from her bruised cheek with a tenderness that somehow made the violence 10 times more terrifying. "You okay?" he asked her softly. She stared at him, eyes shining with something between awe and fear and gratitude. Who are you?" He gave the smallest, saddest smile. "Just someone who should have stepped in sooner. Principal's office. Suspensions, police, none of it mattered. The videos hit the internet before 5th period ended. By that night they were viral. Fesh Jefferson High Marine trended nationwide. News stations picked it up. The Marine Corps Public Affairs Office quietly confirmed Jacob's status and released a single statement. Private First Class Rourke acted in defense of a civilian and conducted himself within the laws of the state. Recruitment applications spiked 400% in 48 hours. But the real story wasn't the fight. The real story was what happened afterward. 3 days later, Emily showed up at Jacob's locker with a black eye turning yellow and a small envelope in her hand. Inside was a handwritten letter that simply read, "Thank you for giving me back my voice." Jacob read it twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the pocket over his heart. Then he looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, the flatness in his eyes cracked open just enough for something human to shine through. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm here." They started sitting together at lunch, then studying together after school. Then long walks around the track at dusk where she asked questions he'd never answered for anyone. About the places he'd been, the things he'd seen, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m. with his own scream in his mouth. And slowly, carefully, Jacob let the armor fall away piece by piece. He told her about the recruiter who never asked for a birth certificate, about carrying his mother's casket alone because his father was too drunk to stand, about the first time he fired a rifle in anger during a live fire exercise and realized he was good at something the world both needed and feared. And Emily listened. She listened the way only someone who's been broken and rebuilt herself can listen. She never flinched from the dark parts. She never asked him to be less than he was. Winter came. Snow blanketed the football field where Connor Reed used to rule like a petty king. Connor transferred schools after his father, a local car dealership owner, started losing customers who didn't want to buy from the family of a bully. Blake's eardrum healed, but his hearing never quite came back, and with it went his dreams of a baseball scholarship. The kingdom fell in less than a month. On the night of the winter formal, Emily waited by the gym doors in a simple emerald dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a 1940s film reel. Jacob arrived in his dress blues, something no one at school had ever seen him wear. The medals were few, but the eagle globe and anchor on his chest gleamed under the colored lights. When he offered her his white-gloved hand, half the senior class openly cried. They danced once, slowly, while the entire gym watched in reverent silence. Then Jacob led her outside to the courtyard where everything had begun. Snow fell soft and thick around them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same letter she'd given him months earlier, now worn from being carried everywhere. "I ship out in 3 weeks," he said quietly. 24 months in Okinawa, then wherever they send me after that. Emily's breath clouded in the cold. "I know. I'm not asking you to wait," he continued, voice rough. "I'm asking if you'll let me write to you. Every day if I can. Because the only time I feel human anymore is when I'm talking to you." She stepped close, placed her hand over the letter pressed to his heart, and rose on her toes to kiss him. Soft, certain, and unafraid. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. "Write me every day, Jacob Rourke," she said. "And when you come home, I'll be right here. Because you gave me back my courage the day you refused to look away." The least I can do is give you something worth coming home to." He kissed her again under the falling snow, and for the first time since he was 14 years old, Jacob cried, silent, hot tears that froze on his cheeks before they could fall. Years later, long after multiple combat tours, after a silver star pinned to a chest that carried scars no one at Jefferson High could imagine, after he came home for good and opened a small mixed martial arts gym that taught bullied kids how to stand tall without ever throwing the first punch, Jacob would still take that worn letter out of his wallet every single night. He kept it in a waterproof sleeve next to a photograph of a girl in an emerald dress smiling like the world could never hurt her again. Because sometimes the biggest mistake a bully ever makes isn't picking the wrong target. It's not realizing the quiet kid in the back already knows how to end wars. So here's to the ones who walk softly until the moment demands they don't. Here's to the protectors who hide in plain sight, carrying thunder in their silence. And here's to the day the world learns that real strength isn't the hand that strikes first. It's the heart that refuses to look away. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone finally stood up and everything changed? Or maybe you were the one who found courage you didn't know you had. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this moved you even a little, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet doesn't mean weak, and subscribe for more cinematic stories of redemption, justice, and the kind of heroes who don't wear capes. They wear dog tags. Until next time, stay dangerous, stay kind, and never ever look away.